It's my pleasure to introduce our panelist for today's broadcast, Larry Harding, Vice Chairman and Executive Director for Corporate Development for Radius. Frequently referenced as an expert resource for international trends and hubs like the Wall Street Journal and CFO Magazine, Larry was awarded the prestigious Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award for 2013 in the Maryland region. Prior to Radius, Larry served as Vice President of International Finance for Sienna Corporation, where he managed, developed, and implemented the financial accounting and compliance functions for Sienna's international operations, which included over 30 overseas offices in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Larry is a licensed CPA in Massachusetts and holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics with a dual major in Finance and Accounting from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Over to you, Larry.
Ed, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's dialed in and taken time out of your day to listen to the webinar. The topic for today is expanding into overseas markets. One of the observations we've had over the years is that whether it's robust domestic markets or challenging domestic markets, it's been relatively easy for U.S. and European headquartered companies to sort of stick to their knitting and focus more closely on the home front. Next slide, please. So we hesitate to call it Rip Van Winkle syndrome or an ostrich sticking its head into the sand, but one of the realities is that while there's been a lot of focus on domestic markets, the world is evolving and changing in some very exciting ways, many of which present a lot of upside and opportunities. So while it's easy to default into looking at the home front, it's definitely in most businesses' interest these days to at least think about having an overseas strategy, if not necessarily actually opening up overseas offices themselves. Some of these changing dynamics can be a little bit surprising and in some ways even counterintuitive. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Larry. Now we have time for our first polling question of the webinar. Please use the polling panel on the side of your screen. We'll go ahead and open up the first question. What region are you considering expanding operations into? Please use the polling panel to cast your vote. We'll leave the polls open for approximately 7 seconds to allow attendees to respond. I can see that attendees are responding. Thank you very much. Please do continue to cast your vote. We'll leave the poll open for approximately maybe 2 more seconds. It looks like a number of people are just responding now. Looks like most attendees have responded now. We're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Looks like Asia Pacific and Japan and Europe leading, followed by Latin America. Larry?
That's great. So actually the poll results are fairly representative, not too far off of sort of the mix of regions and country locations that we see in our customer base. So it seems like this is a fairly representative group, and a lot of the topics I speak to should be helpful for most involved. So I just wanted to bring up a handful of what we think at least are somewhat interesting dynamics. Some fairly obvious, but some not necessarily obvious at all. For example, this one here, where according to The Economist in a recent survey, 4 of the fastest growing economies for 2014 are expected to be in Africa. Number 2, Sierra Leone. Number 10, Zambia. Number 4, Libya. Number 9, Eritrea. And it's not necessarily, it's not only these 4 countries. Africa as a region is producing some really robust growth rates across a number of different countries. And as you know, growth can be one big driver for going overseas. Next slide, please. So the world's fastest growing economy is often thought of as China, and while China for quite a few years now has indeed been really significant, especially given the size of its economy coupled with its growth, the actual fastest growing economy in the world right now is a neighbor of China, Mongolia, at a fairly blistering 15% plus GDP growth rate. Next slide. So It's pretty easy to think that perhaps the U.S. or Japan are the two top countries for innovation. Certainly, they're both well represented at number 3 and number 4. But actually, number 1 is South Korea, and number 2 is Sweden. So it's not sort of the usual suspects only where innovation is driving a lot of economy and a lot of growth opportunities. Next slide. For example, who's the most entrepreneurial? The U.S. is highly entrepreneurial at number 32, but the most entrepreneurial economies are the highly counterintuitive, I thought, Iceland, Cyprus, and New Zealand. Again, starting up new businesses can lead to a lot of different growth opportunities, not only for them starting the business in the overseas locations, but for us here in the U.S. Next slide, please.